As the movie begins, we're introduced to Katie and Micah, a young couple who have just moved into a new home in a suburb of San Diego, California. Katie claims that she's been plagued by ghostly presence ever since she was a kid. Micah decides to get to the bottom of this issue. So one day he buys a top-notch camera and recording equipment to gather evidence of the ghostly presence. Later that night, the couple is relaxing in the living room. They hear some strange noises in the house, but as they go to investigate, it only turns out to be a malfunctioning ice maker. Then they proceed upstairs, where Katie argues with Micah, complaining that she does not want a camera in her bedroom. However, Micah manages to convince her in a heartbeat, and after setting up the camera to monitor the bed, they both fall asleep. Somewhere around midnight, the camera captures some pounding noise and sounds of keys falling the next day. When the couple goes downstairs, they discover keys on the floor. Katie swears that she remembers putting the key on the table, but strange things like these have become normal for them, so they just carry on with their day. Later, Katie scheduled a meeting with a psychic named Dr. Fredericks to talk about their problem. Even though he believes in ghosts, Micah is a little skeptical about the whole situation. However, Katie believes it's a serious matter and asks him to behave appropriately in front of the psychic. When Dr. Fredericks shows up, Katie tells him that she's an English major student, while Micah is a day trader, and they've recently moved into the house. Then Katie reveals that she's been seeing shadowy figures and experiencing paranormal activity occasionally since she was 8 years old, and her sister is also a witness to it. After a mysterious fire forced her family to relocate when she was 8, the spooky activities stopped for a while, but in the last few weeks, the incidents have resumed once Katie walks throughout the house, telling and showing the psychic the strange events they've been observing recently. She explains how they've been dealing with lights flickering randomly, weird screeching sounds, and someone whispering her name every night. Dr. Fredericks tells them that the entity chasing Katie is not a ghost, but a demon. He claims that the demon thrives on bad energy, and that its purpose is to follow Katie around and torment her wherever she goes. Micah recommends using a Ouija board to communicate, but Dr. Fredericks advises against it because it will only give the demon more power and control. He counsels them to not tease or interact with the demon, and not to encourage any behavior that would provoke it, as he's merely an expert in ghosts. He advises the couple to contact his colleague, Dr. Johann Avery's, who's a demonologist. Though Katie appears to be concerned about the issue, Micah dismisses it and tells her not to call the demonologist, thinking it's crazy to do so. She then asks him to stop the camera, but Micah insists on confronting the ghostly intruder on video, and claims that filming is his method of staying in control of the situation. On the third night, the camera captures some strange events, such as the bedroom door moving by itself, but the paranormal activity has just begun. On the fifth night, Katie suddenly wakes up from a nightmare and swears that something was whispering to her while she was sleeping, and when Micah tries to comfort her, they suddenly hear a thumping coming from downstairs. They immediately go to investigate, but since they find nothing unusual, Micah starts to mock the demon by calling it worthless. The next day, Micah hears a voice in the audio from last night, but he's unable to decipher what it's trying to convey. He believes that in order to speak with the demon, they should get a Ouija board, but Katie does not agree with him. She asks Micah not to use the Ouija board, as it could provoke the demon. On the 13th night, Katie wakes up to the sound of unearthly scraping and scratching noises. Moments later, Micah also wakes up, and they both hear shrieking sounds, followed by a huge crash. When they go downstairs to check what's going on, they discover the chandelier swinging on its own. In the next scene, it's the 15th night, and Katie suddenly wakes up at around 1:30 am. She then stands beside the bed for several hours as Micah sleeps, gazing at him. Then, at about 3:30 am, she leaves the room. Sometime later, Micah also wakes up and that Katie's not there. He goes downstairs to look for her and finds her on a backyard swing. Micah tries to bring her inside, but Katie tells him that she's alright, and in a detached voice, she asks him to leave her alone. When Micah goes inside to get blankets for her, he hears a big thud from the room and notices the television is now turned on. And just then, he's startled by Katie, who claims that he woke her up. She's now fully conscious and returns to her bed as if nothing has happened. The next morning, the couple wakes up and watches the tape from previous night. Micah shows her the footage, but she swears she doesn't remember anything. Katie does not remember being outdoors, and certainly does not remember staring at Micah while he was sleeping. Taking matters into his own hands, Micah brings a Ouija board into the house to communicate with the demon. Just before they head out to dinner, Micah pulls out the Ouija board, but Katie gets enraged at him for undermining the psychic's warning. She fiercely bursts out of the house, and Micah follows her. The two then go outside and leave the Ouija board in the living room. A while after, the plants and curtains start shaking, and the planchette of the Ouija board starts to move by itself. A small fire breaks out on the board, but it quickly goes out on its own. Around 11 o'clock, the couple returns, and Micah notices that the board has left them with an unreadable message. He tries to tell Katie about this, but she's still upset and avoids him. The next day, Micah tries to decipher what the Ouija board is spelled, but it's not that easy, and when he shows her the footage of the board burning, Katie freaks out of her mind. She claims that they need to call the demonologist, but Micah insists on not doing so, and promises to handle things himself. That evening, Katie's friend Amber arrives and offers her a place to stay, but Katie refuses, claiming that the demon will follow her wherever she goes. Once again, Katie insists on calling the demonologist, but Micah wants to try one final option to confirm the demon's existence before doing so. His next strategy is to sprinkle baby powder on the ground to catch anything that's stumbling around at night. Katie agrees to it, but warns that she'll call the demonologist the next day if nothing happens. Now, at roughly 3:15 am, they're awakened by the sounds of footsteps and growls. When they notice a set of footprints entering the room, but not leaving, the couple realizes the demon is still there. Eventually, they track the footprints to where Micah notices something. They discover an old, half-burned picture of young Katie that had previously been destroyed in an unexplained house fire. Katie's taken it back when she sees the photo, because she hasn't seen it in 15 years. The next morning, she calls the demonologist, only to find out that he's out of the country and will return in a few days. Having no other option now, Katie calls Dr. Friedrichs again, who says he'll come back the next day. That night, at around 4 am, a light in the hallway turns on, and loud footsteps are heard moving up the stairs, waking them up. The door slams, and loud thumping is heard, as if something is trying to get in. They open the door and check what the funk is going on, but see nothing. Now, Katie refuses to return to the room, but Micah eventually persuades her and brings her to bed. During breakfast, they once again hear a thud coming from upstairs, but this is the first time that this has happened during daylight. They immediately run upstairs, only to see that photo of them is broken, with only Micah's face scratched. Just then, Katie claims that she feels something close by breathing on her, and when she notices that her hair is moving, as if someone is blowing on it, she runs for her life. Sometime later, Dr. Friedrichs arrives at the house, but he's immediately filled with dread. Despite their appeals for his help, he leaves apologetically, claiming that his presence only enrages the demon. Feeling helpless about the situation they're in, Katie cries herself sleep that night as Micah hugs her. Micah tries to discover the words on the Ouija board, and discovers the name Diane. He searches the internet and discovers an article about a woman named Diane who had similar occurrences in the 1960s. Her house was also burned down when she was 8, and she also experienced a recurring haunting. However, the website states that Diane was killed by the demon as a result of hiring an exorcist. So Micah and Katie decide not to call the demonologist to avoid infuriating the demon. Later, when Micah tries to share another one of his ideas, Katie rejects him, as she believes that all this is happening because he brought the camera and mocked the ghost. Micah also argues with her, claiming that he was unaware of any of this before they moved in, and that he's not the one to blame. Sometime later, the couple makes up and apologizes to one another, as she cries and blames herself for everything. Micah comforts her and puts her to sleep. That night, the paranormal activity begins to manifest physically, as Katie is dragged from her bedroom by an invisible force. When Micah wakes up, he rushes after them, and after some struggle, he's able to unlock the door and release Katie. The next day, he examines Katie's wound and notices a huge bite mark on her back. Paranoid by this abnormality, they decide to leave the home and stay in a hotel for some time. When Micah returns from packing their belongings, he finds Katie sitting on the floor and tightly gripping a crucifix, causing her. Micah gets her to let go of the crucifix immediately, which she then burns in the fire. Then he takes her to the bed as he finishes packing. When he's done, Micah asks if she's ready, but Katie refuses to leave, and with a smile on her face, she tells him that they'll be okay. Micah is unaware that she's being possessed and decides to stay. On the 21st night, Katie wakes up at 1:30 a.m. and spends nearly 2 hours watching Micah sleep. Then she goes downstairs and yells Micah's name, causing him to wake up. Micah hurries downstairs, but this time, he does not have a camera with him. Then we hear Micah screaming and fighting for his life, until everything goes quiet. Moments later, and a bloodied Katie walks into the room. She crawls across the floor, and as her face warps into a demonic look, she attacks the camera. The film fades to dark with an epilogue stating that Micah's body was later located by the police, while Katie's whereabouts are unknown. That's all for today. Subscribe and like it if you want more videos like this.